Welcome to Latinos in Michigan. I'm your host, Liliana Ospina Herbstreit. And May is the month of mamas, mothers. And we have a very special mom as a guest. Her name is Traci Ruiz. I met her last month. She contacted me through LinkedIn and told me about Mrs. Eva Salinas, who turned 102 years old a few weeks ago. And but I wanted to interview Traci because Traci has a very interesting story. She's Hispanic and she's a mother, and she was in the law enforcement for almost over 2 decades. So I want to know more about Traci. Traci, I was telling the audience that you are a special Latina mama because you are a good friend of Mrs. Eva, which is what you do for her is amazing because you're doing more than many people will do for their own family. And the other, you were in the law enforcement for 25 years, or how long?
Yes, I worked for City of Lansing Police Department, Lansing, Michigan for 25 years. So we have a retirement at 25 years, and then some move on to other careers, which I chose to do.
So that's what I find amazing because you're so calm. So, and the idea that the perception of many people had of police officers is that they're tough. And I had met you through the weeks, and you're the nicest person, very calm. So how do you manage to be so calm, but very strong, because you were in law enforcement for 25 years, and I admire and I respect a lot the police officers, because they had to deal with the worst of situations, and sometimes with the worst of human characters. So how do you manage to level that up?
Well, I think we have a great community, number one. I was very appreciative to be welcomed with open arms. My grandparents were from the area. They migrated from Mexico, and then they went to Texas. They were migrant workers. And then my grandma and one of her sisters migrated to Michigan, while the other 6 siblings stayed in Tejas. So we really have a parted families. It's very interesting that we have some in Texas and some in Michigan. But what always amazed me is that the love amongst the family members. They didn't have any money. We grew up with very little, but we always have food on the table and love within the family. And even when I'd visit, go over to Texas, it was so amazing to see my grandma's sisters had the same antics, and they cooked the exact same way, and they prepared the table the same way, even though they weren't together, physically together. The miles were separated, or they were separated by miles. It was amazing to see the exact same. I felt like I was right at home every time I went over there. So I think really it goes back to a solid foundation. When we were growing up, my grandparents had that love for us. It was unconditional love, and it didn't matter what we chose to do in life, as long as it was legal. That would make them proud. And so they really embraced, our decisions. My cousins and I grew up like sisters and brothers. We were, I lived in a typical Mexican household with my grandparents and my 2 aunts and my father. And my aunts and uncles were in our backyard next door. My cousins were with me. And I think we all had that, my cousins and I were that spoiled generation. We were the second generation here. We never had to pick in the fields. My grandparents and my dad and sisters and brothers worked very hard to see that we didn't end up in the fields. And so I did pursue a college degree. I thought that was never going to be possible, but I was an athlete. So I first went to Lansing Community College and started running there, and I was able to obtain a full ride academic scholarship over to Michigan State based upon my grades, and that's how I ended up getting a college degree at the time. And I had committed back then that someone believed in me and gave me a chance, and for life I was going to return that favor. And that's why I've chosen a life of service. And I think it also helped to not be so jaded. Some of my peers, you've seen over time nationwide, some of the officers get down after working midnight shift. And I worked half my career on midnight shift in the thick of violence. And people would say to me, why are you taking care of these senior citizens? Or why do you volunteer so much in the community? They don't pay you to do that. And I would say, if we all just give a little, the world would be a better place. And that was kind of my sounding board for always keeping a level eye on people, that humanity is good. People can be kind. It's not all the violent world that we saw on night shift. So I think the senior citizens were a true balance, and coming across many victims that needed our help, that was rewarding to be able to help them. So I would have to say that was a secret to my success of not being so hardened. It was finding the positives that we still have left in this world and helping contribute to them.
That's amazing, and I think that propelled you to what you do because you help a lot of senior citizens. And in one of our conversations a few weeks ago, we were talking about how hard it is for many seniors to be completely alone because the family is just, forget about them. They live in the senior houses, and in our culture, we take care of our elders. And that's, for instance, my husband he's American. He's from here, from Hastings, and he tells me one of the things I admire from the Hispanic community is how close they are and how they take care of their elders. Because he's white. White people don't do it. They just live in their seniors' houses. And what you did for Mrs. Salinas, how you've been taking care of her for the last 28 years. That's amazing. And I think it's important to that people know more about how your company is helping other seniors.
Yes. So Mrs. Salinas, I met her at the start of my career in 1993 when I was a brand new police officer. We would have one of the local churches had a fiesta every year, and I would work that event on representing the police department for safety and security. And I met Mrs. Salinas. She was a hardworking member, a church member. She was one of the original founding members for Cristo Rey Church. And she has been a godmother to over 200 people at that church. And it was just neat to see there was so much wisdom and love within those church members and watching them work together. And it reminded me again, so close to home. My grandparents are now deceased and I miss them. It's hard not having them around, but it was really nice to get to know Mrs. Salinas over time. In about 2013 is when I became a little closer to her because I found out she didn't have anywhere to go for the holidays when I would stop in and visit with her. And so I started taking her to our home gatherings and the holiday functions. And I really didn't start getting actively involved, true involvement with her care until about 2018 when her brother had reached out. And I didn't realize how serious it was and how much help she had needed at the time. So my company, the for-profit side, I do provide expert witness testimony in court cases for elder abuse, domestic violence, and sexual assault. But the nonprofit side of it is helping indigent elders in our community. So those who truly have no monies, have no resources, maybe don't have family members close by, that's something that I do contribute and give back time and donate it back to society.
That's very remarkable. But explain to the community, what does your company exactly do?
Yes. So when I say expert witness testimony, there are court cases that may take place. So I'll give you an example. So let's say there's two siblings that are fighting over money. We don't normally discuss that in the Latin community, right? Because many of us came from backgrounds where there was no money to fight over. But in a lot of other cultures, or even sometimes within our culture, there is money that let's say a mother or father passed away and that money is left in willed. And some of them might change documents to try to get more of the monies. They might start abusing the person before they're actually deceased. They might verbally and physically abuse them by hitting them and taking their monies and feel like it's owed to them. And then, in fact, later on, that case might go to court where they're then, in fact, trying to prove, is there a criminal element where there are charges or prosecution that's going to be sought? Is this a civil matter where maybe it's going to be an attorney case where they need an expert to testify, an expert witness to testify on behalf of a family member? That is what my company will do nationwide. And it can be in regards to elder abuse, domestic violence, which is prevalent, and also sexual assault cases. That does happen in the elder community, believe it or not. We do have cases to that magnitude. And again, when it goes to the civil side, it's usually somebody's arguing over wills, trusts, monies, something of value, put it that way.
Wow. What's the worst case you had, encountered?
There are so many. That's the sad part is that elder abuse is so grossly underreported. It's very hard to pull statistics and get true statistics, because many times, let's say a report will come in and a neighbor will call and they'll say, I think I heard a loud noise over at my neighbor's house. Can the police respond? And then the police respond and they go there, and it might be grandma and grandson. Grandson's living with grandma, has no job, might have a drug addiction or abusing alcohol, and says that nothing happened. Grandma's definitely afraid to talk to the police, doesn't want to say anything because the grandson's the caretaker. And so grandma says nothing happened. And so the police leave, they don't know about the situation, or maybe they get called back and there is a signs of physical abuse. And if they have probable cause or reason to be able to make an arrest, then they are supposed to, according to the Michigan law. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes the perpetrator is left sitting in that home with the victim because the victim is too afraid to report the caretaker. They might be embarrassed. They might not want to prosecute a family member. That is pretty typical. So I've had so many serious cases, but one I would say was pretty egregious is lengthy, where it is quite common for I call it the perpetrator, the accused, the person who's doing the actual physical assaulting, takes the person, if they're injured, and they'll take them out of jurisdiction. When I say out of jurisdiction, I mean, if you live in, let's say, Howell, Michigan, they will usually, the perpetrator, if the victim needs some type of medical assistance, they will take them to another county or another area, thinking that they can't be tracked if they take them outside of where they actually live. So when I say jurisdiction, that's where someone lives. They take them outside of that jurisdiction and they might seek medical treatment. So one case I had come in, it was called in by another authority. I was working at Lansing Police at the time. And one of my veteran peers, had been a police officer for 15 years at the time, had called me up. It was afternoon shift when I was working as a detective, and he says, I need your help. And I said, what do you have? And he says, and he was at a loss for words. And he said, I just don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Where are you at? What call did you get sent to? And he's like, I'm at a hospital. I'm over in another county. I get here, but I can't believe what I'm seeing. And I said, well, what are you seeing? And he said, you can't believe this lady. And I said, okay, do me a favor, take some pictures and bring them back to me. And I said, and is she married? And he explains, yes, she's married and she's in her late 70s. And I said, where's the husband? And he said, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, who called this in? And it was a local jurisdiction where that hospital is seated, if you will, in a certain county. The local jurisdiction got called for a suspicious subject. That's what the call came in as, a suspicious subject in this hospital. And when I asked him to elaborate, he brings me pictures, and the lady's body was beat on every part of her body. Her entire neck was black and blue, all different stages of bruising. She had a golf ball size scabbed over, literally mass on her head. She had bruises in between her toes, on the bottom of her feet, and she was a person that wasn't able to walk without assistance. So she was non-ambulatory, is what they referred to it as, and she was a stroke victim of 5 years prior. So she only spoke 2 to 3 words in a sentence. And by the time the officer had gotten the call, she had already been in the hospital for 5 days. And they didn't know where the husband was at. My officers had not investigated further yet because they really didn't know what they had. And again, this goes back to ageism. When you put a number, an age with a crime, we teach our police officers basic 101 in the police academy in regards to domestic violence. If someone puts their hands on somebody else and there's probable cause to believe a physical abuse has occurred, then you must make an arrest if they're domestic partners, which means they live together, they formally live together, they're married, they have children in common. Those are some of the criterias. And it can be intimate or it can be non-intimate when you're dealing with children. So that, that's step 101. And my officers had not even taken that step because they were so taken back by how this lady looked, being beat on every part of her body and fingertip bruising in between her groin. This is a lady who can't consent to sex. So as it unfolds, the officer brings me the pictures. We start working the case. They go find the husband who was at home at this point 5 days later. And so the big question becomes, where's the crime scene? Is there a crime scene? Is this a crime? Is this an accident? The husband reported she had one bed fall out of a bed. And again, to see her in all different stages of bruising and contusions and scabbing, you knew that wasn't true. And so they brought him in and I interviewed him. And clearly when I started to interview him, he was in no capacity to be taking care of her. But he tells me he wanted a Cadillac. And so that would have been $600 a month. The payment was $600 a month. And he didn't want to put her in a nursing home to give up that money because he wanted his Cadillac. So he chose to leave her at home and he wasn't taking care of her properly. When I backtracked, the egregious part about this case was she went into the ER and nobody had called from the ER to report the abuse. Not a nurse, not a doctor, not any of the staff members in the ER. She had been in the hospital for 5 days, and the only reason they called in a suspicious subject call was because the husband physically yanked her IVs out of her arm, threw her in a wheelchair, and was trying to escape with her out of the hospital. And a doctor caught him in the room. So that is the only reason they even put in a call for a suspicious subject. It was not a domestic violence. It was not anything else. A suspicious subject call is a very minimal call for us, or it can be, I should say. But no one even thought to put in the call for domestic or domestic violence. And they had allowed this husband access to her for the previous 5 days while she's trying to heal. And what's interesting is she remained in that hospital for 19 days. On 19th day, she suffered another stroke. And I would visit her every day and she was getting better. And my hope was that she could talk to me at some point to provide a statement. She never did. When she suffered that stroke on the 21st day, surprisingly, she passed away. And that was very much a surprise because she had been healing when she received the proper care. So she was never able to give a statement. The husband explains, that he knows he shouldn't have been caring for her. But the other egregious part is she saw several doctors in her care in that condition. So she would see a stylist. Her hairstylist would come to her home. She would see a stylist every 3 weeks. She saw in that capacity. Now, mind you, people would say, well, we didn't disrobe her, we didn't take her clothes off. But her entire neck was black and blue beat, the contusion on her head. I mean, there are signs that even if you didn't disrobe her, you would have noticed right off the bat. She saw her ophthalmologist in that condition and all the receptionists at the ophthalmologist's office in that condition. As I backtracked and, obviously did interviews, these are all the people in her care that saw her, and her primary care physician had seen her in that capacity as well. And he told me that he had been talking to the husband and saying to him, recommending that someone else care for her. But he never did push the envelope to take the next steps. So when the husband took her to the doctor's office, the doctor actually saw her in that condition, told the husband to put her back in the car and take her across the street to the hospital. So he leaves the perpetrator with the victim and tells the perpetrator to go take her to the hospital. So the husband did take the first step. He took her to the hospital, but he was witnessed by a medic throwing her out of the car into a wheelchair, not properly with a gait belt, but like throwing her, manhandling her in a wheelchair is how they described it. So he started to take steps towards the hospital, and then he changed his mind and turned back around. And this medic caught him, intervened, and said, what is going on, when he saw her in the condition that she was in. And then he forced that husband to take her inside, not knowing the full story. So that's one of many egregious stories I could give you. But it's sad to think that the ER physician, the nurses, the staff at the ER didn't report. The ophthalmologist, the staffing at the ophthalmologist's office didn't report. The hairstylist didn't report. And keep in mind, when I talked to the hairstylist, she liked the husband because the husband was paying her. So she was not going to give a statement. So again, you've got all sides of the system that there's problems, and even down to the officer not knowing how to deal with the case. And that was a veteran officer that we walked through the case afterwards, and I walked the officers through, what can we do better in the future and how can we better assist these senior citizens. But that was the first thing that led me to starting some of these other boards and helping with legislation to get some bills passed for elder initiatives and spearheading some more projects that have really helped senior causes.
Tell me about those bills then. That's interesting because this society, when it comes to elderly, it's like disposable. I hate to say it. It's like in our society as Hispanics, we honor our elders. We take care of them. But here, I'm sorry to say it, and being as honest, some people just don't want to deal with them. That's what they send into the senior houses. And there are horror stories. It's terrible about what some of some people of these seniors' houses do to the elders. So it's terrible. So tell me more about that, the laws that you just mentioned.
Yes. So with that was really our first case in 2003 that came to really serious light. It received attention around the state, and it led to me starting and forming a elder death review team with Dr. Dean Cinco, who was our former Ingham County medical examiner and in charge of our health department. So I partnered with him in saying, I'm getting sent to these calls. I see we have a lot of great systems in place for child abuse cases, for domestic violence and sexual assault. But unfortunately, when it comes to aging, when you add an older age in a factor of these cases, people tend to overlook them and they're not handling the way that they should. And so I asked him, I said, we have a child death review team. So whenever a child dies and we go to a scene for law enforcement, we have a team approach with a prosecutor, a victim's advocate. We roll out that approach so that we don't have to keep re-interviewing people or making them go through the trauma over and over. So we try to do a team approach when it comes to child abuse cases. And when it comes to elderly, my question was, why isn't the same thing being done? Because we have people that are vulnerable, just as vulnerable on the opposite end of the spectrum as children. And so we formed an elder death review team in Ingham County. We were the second ever in the state in 2006. And what we did was not only did we review elder death cases, but I also put in a component where we would talk and discuss serious abuse cases. So we were trying for that prevention piece as well, because that really was our goal, making people aware of the issue, providing a prevention piece and resources and how to report. And then we were hoping to ultimately minimize the abuse or the deaths that were occurring. And we saw great success. We had 2 other counties join in with us. So we started out as Ingham County, and Clinton County and Eaton County would come to the table as well. We had about 20 partners around the table monthly, and it was service providers all the way from your county medical examiners, your pathologists, your county prosecutors, local law enforcement, adult protective services. So it was those key services that we felt we could provide a better prevention piece in our area. And within the first case that we reviewed, the one thing I would say is that I knew we had homicides around the nation. It wasn't just a Lansing, Michigan problem. And so I would say we need better systems in place to be able to uncover these crimes. And people would say, really, there's elder homicides? And I'd say, yes, they call them gray murders in California. But I fully believe we have these going on, because even the abuse cases, like I had reported about this lady in the hospital, even those abuse cases aren't getting reported. So one needle poke when someone overdoses an elderly person during an autopsy is not going to be found. It's very slim to none to be able to find one needle poke on elderly people that many times have other injections. You know, they might have IVs running regularly, or they might have regular medication that they get. So it's very tough to uncover. With that elder death review team, I had asked for autopsies and toxicology. So that was my criteria coming to the table of, could the health department director give us that when we go out to scenes? We were doing that for other death investigations. So whether it was drug-related, gang-related, child-related, any other type of deaths, we were retrieving that type of information. But unfortunately for elderly, we did not have any detectives going back on scenes, and we did not pay overtime. It was after hours for a detective to go to a scene. So you had the officer doing the best they could, trying to piece together information at scene to relay into a report the following business day whenever the detectives got back to work, which was wrong. You know, that was my first thing that I brought up, that why are we minimizing the work or services that we're providing for these elderly people, because they should be revered, not just kicked to the curb, and their deaths do matter. So we were able to do this elder death review team. Like I said, I co-chaired it with Dr. Dean Cinco. We co-founded it. We're the second in the state. Genesee County had the first one a couple months before us. And we uncovered a homicide on our very first case that we did. And within 18 months, we had our second homicide that we had uncovered. These are people that would have walked freely, because most deaths are reported as natural causes, if you will, by a caretaker. And so I mean, that's a generalization, of course. But it's typical that when someone calls in, they'll just say it's natural death. And the lady that we had on our first homicide was 94 years old. So that, of course, made the state papers, you know, around the state. Everybody was excited about this and saying there's such progress. But I was saying, are we really going to get excited about this? Because we're so far behind the times in Michigan that I was trying to speed us up and catch up to where we really needed to be. So that led to our elder death review team was very a functional part in having people around the state that did speak up at legislative hearings. And some of the bills that were enacted were to put stiffer penalties on actually put vulnerable adult abuse on the books and to put stiffer penalties behind those. We have a long ways to go. You know, we don't have the same laws on the books to protect our elderly yet that we do for children and some other people, but we're going. It's going to take the whole community coming together to find that this is an important topic. We are in the middle of a pandemic, so you can see that some other priorities took precedence, but we still fight the good fight. You know, that's part of my company behind the scenes, is that helping as many people as we possibly can for a better future, because these seniors do deserve it.
What will be the message for the community, Traci?
I think it's really important for people to get involved. I've talked to other representatives in the past, and, you know, there's term limits. And when I talk to them, I would say, you know, you have the power and authority to make a decision now and to take action. And if you wait until your term is served, and then waiting for what? If we keep looking over the years and what hasn't been done, we all need to get involved and take strides. So it takes each one of us talking to our constituents, you know, in talking to legislators and rep and having these conversations so that we all have a brighter future. There is a high number of people living to an older age. So the reality of this happening or being taken advantage of, whether it's physically or financial or sexually, is high. And so if we can put preventative measures in place now, we're that much further ahead in Michigan for a brighter future for our seniors and for those of us who are aging. Obviously, we'll be a senior someday.
Well, Traci, thank you. I appreciate your time and this interview, and I'm very happy to have met you because you are an amazing woman. Very like a role model for many Hispanic women here in Michigan. Thank you for what you do.
Well, Liliana, I think you're quite amazing yourself. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to come in May, because no matter what title we wear in law enforcement, and I do help a lot of law enforcement agencies still, and no matter what title we wear and what rank I rose to, nothing is ever better than mother, the title of mother. And I'm very proud to have been able to raise two beautiful boys at the same time, working midnight shift and hauling them to court. And they've been to every, you know, people say, how do you volunteer in the community? Those poor kids were hauled everywhere in that community. But that's what, you know, in turn, I was trying to develop and grow fine young men that will then give back to society as well. And that's the goal, is that we keep building our next generation.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I try to involve my kids in everything I do, because if we don't, as mothers, as, well, Latina, whatever nationality, you know, or ethnicity, if we don't show them the good, the bad, and the ugly in this world, and if we don't show our kids that we need to contribute, how are we going to expect to have good citizens, you know? So I respect you a lot for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana.
Bye.